everybody, it's Against Everyone with Connor Habib. I'm here with musician, author, editor, movie maker, professor, all that stuff, Tim Kinsella. Here we go. Hey everybody, it's Against Everyone with Connor Habib. I'm here with Tim Kinsella. Hi, how you doing?
Good, feeling good.
Good. So I just want to get right off the bat, I think that something with your many music projects, Joan of Arc, Make Believe, all of them, is that you have a way of, I think, making your listeners and your audiences uneasy. And I've heard you talk about, or I've read you talking about this before. Someone asked you, are you trying to fuck with your audience's head? And you said, yes, absolutely. Like it was a very, there's an exclamation point in the way it was written out.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about that uneasiness first. Because it seems to be a staple. The sort of meaning of uneasiness for you, on all levels, in the way that you make your music, switching up who plays the instruments and where you record, in what's happening to the listener when they listen to the record or when they come to the show, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very different for us as the makers than it is for the listeners in a lot of ways. Like, in a way, we're the most receptive audience. And we just played 25 shows in 38 days or something. And my bandmate Jeremy kept talking about, it's so funny. After every show, everyone just keeps saying, you guys are so weird. How is it still so weird? And he's like, but I don't know what quality of what we do that they're talking about. Because, weird isn't a very accurate or specific term. And it makes sense that it wouldn't be weird to us because we are the ones doing it every day. So it's actually the most normal thing in the world for us. Normal and weird, whatever that is. So it's not like the fact that we switch up the recording and writing process each record. That's just a way of resetting it to keep ourselves alert and fresh. It's not even conscious or intentional. It's just the necessary move so that we're present. So I guess that relates to the listener too, and that we want to shock people awake or something.
That when people talk about heaven or hell, when people are trying to imagine what it's like, one of the things that's hardest for people to imagine, I think about, I don't know if you're a hell band or a heaven band or both, but when people talk about hell, they're like, wouldn't you just get used to the pain? Sooner or later? Right. But you don't ever, there is no rest. And I think I've experienced that as someone, I just went to one of your shows a month ago or whatever, whenever you were in Los Angeles, and I felt the same thing. I felt like this is still so, this is such an interruption to what I am thinking is going to happen or to my expectation. And I've been listening to the first record, right? So it is something you don't get used to. And I don't know how you do that to other people, but you should know that there's an audience dysmorphia or something like that. What's happening for us is maybe not what's happening for you.
Yeah, I would have no idea what it's. I would be very curious, to be able to see Joan of Arc sometime.
We'll
from the outside. I have no idea.
Do you have a question? Because I can tell you what it's like. You can't see your own face, but I got it.
Yeah. I don't know. Right. So you just saw that Los Angeles last one.
Yes.
6 weeks ago, a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's fresh in your head what it's like to see us. So I don't know. It's very musical. It's from a strictly objective scientific thing you could just sort of be like, these boxes are being checked off. You know, there's propulsion, there's high frequencies and low frequencies, there's like language elements and rhythm elements and drone elements, and I think we think about it like being pegged as emo for so long is like so ultimately ironic, because I don't know if there's a band in the world that is more objectively scientific in their approach. You know, like we really are just sort of like,
when you make a record or when you play?
Both. But they're very different.
Well, because I would never think that there was a principle of repeatability or any of that sort of stuff when I saw you. So when I saw you last, what's the name of the song? Where you say understanding, understand. So
Eventually All at Once.
Yes, yeah, eventually all at once. And you just kept saying, screaming that again and again. Totally, you know, sometimes on key according to the way the song is, and totally off key at other times. And my boyfriend and I and my best friend were there, and we're like, when the fuck is he gonna stop, right? And so I think maybe that's part of it, is that like, have you ever seen like a Fassbinder movie where he holds the shot for 1 minute, and it's not a still, but it's just, when is it gonna end? When is it gonna end? Like, there's that feeling. That's
a very intentional move over the years for sure. Just like holding things barely too long. I mean, there's like I think I haven't seen it since theaters, but there's a Grizzly Man, that Herzog film. There's like this moment, if I remember correctly, where he's like doing an interview, and the person he's talking to like makes her point, and I was like, okay. And then he just like keeps the shot. I was like, no, you don't get to control when this thing wraps up. So you know, the songs are sort of made to absorb expanding and contracting in different places. So they do sort of come to life in the present at different moments at different times. You know, on different nights, this moment might be something we glance over or hurry through or something, and this moment's something we sit in. And excuse me, lyrically, when I was very young and we started, that was a very intentional thing. I've never been I've always been kind of repulsed by like what's the word, not just symbolism, but like what's that sort of like foofy, drippy surrealism. You know, I've always been more of like a T.S. Eliot objective correlative kind of like, put the concrete particulars next to each other.
I see. Yeah.
But don't draw the connection. Just like, this is very specific and this is very specific, but there's an element of estrangement that they're next to each other, and let that beating create the sort of space for the listener to enter.
Right.
And that was very conscious at the beginning, because it was like, I would see my friends' bands, and I'd be like on tour with people, and like, they'd be like in a happy, chipper mood all day, and then have to go sing this song and like convince people that they're so sad. And I'd just be like, that's so stupid, because we were just like cracking up 10 minutes ago. Or, you know, they're all grumpy all day, then they got to be like, hey, everybody. And I just like couldn't do that. So I was very aware that the lyrics couldn't have emotional charges that depended on the performance, you know?
Yeah, there's a way in which, so, do you know, there's this book called Meditations on the Tarot. Do you know this book? It's by Anonymous, but the Anonymous is actually Valentine Tomberg, this Catholic former anthroposophist occultist. And in it, somewhere, I forget which tarot card he's meditating on, but he says something like, we have to stop in our art relying, we have to stop relying on the angels to save us in our art. And what he means is, there's this way of making art where you go into the unconscious, and then like you just hope you'll fucking get out of it, right? And that's the angels rescuing you. They'll like pull you out. But he's saying, what if it's illuminated so that the unconscious and the conscious are working at the same time? So I'm sort of thinking of that when you say it.
I've never thought of it in those terms specifically, but it's like, or that model of understanding it, but that's like the ultimate, like, I've taught a bunch of different classes, creative writing classes, mostly But, you know, some workshops and some survey classes. Is that the other word?
What is it called? Like a survey?
It's not a survey.
No,
What's
it's a... what's it called? You mean like 7 people in the room?
Yeah,
and
well,
you talk like the
there's
graduate school seminars.
Well, no, there's like workshops where you're like actually outputting.
Yeah.
And then there's like, you know, like a certain topic, experimental fiction.
Got it. Okay.
Or scenes, or like.
We know what you mean, but I don't know for some reason, I don't know the word for it right now either.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
but whichever class I'm teaching, it always ends up. We always end up at this same spot, which I think is like a general rule of schooling of like, it's more about taking a course with the professor than the topic. And we always end up at the same spot of like, the more of your subconscious you can make conscious in your creativity, then like the greater sense of self-determination you have in the world. Because like, you know, if your consciousness is really like your 5 senses and how each of them is warped by subconscious associations of your memories, and you don't remember everything you remember, so then like the more conscious you can become of your subconscious, then like just you have greater sense of free will, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. To me,
because you understand like what's
to me it does, but
you.
you can rewind that if you were listening. That didn't make sense. Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, it's interesting because I would think, because I've taught writing too, and I think that I always try to tell whether they're my students or my clients, when I was just doing it one-on-one, that you want the unconscious stuff to be an option, and there are lots of pathways into that option, and whatever pathway you take, it gives a different shape to that unconscious. So maybe you can't actually, there's no way to actually access the unconscious exactly, because by default you just can't, you know, it's unavailable to you. But walking towards it in a certain way in your style or your writing or whatever creates an effect that you can predict. So that's sort of what I'm hearing you say.
We basically, like, the songs are recipes, and it's sort of like we're aware that like I said, all these elements are present, you know, each in their warped form at any moment, but they're all there. But we're more, you know, throwing off like the ratios and the relations between the like they're totally identifiable qualities, but they might be serving different functions than they normally do in the present.
Yeah, so in some weird way, I don't mean this in a Jungian sense, but there's like an archetypal song that that shuffles its stuff around.
Right, like let's say it's probably a Big Star song.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
Right, like
okay.
But in one of our songs, the vocals in this Big Star song might be our drum part.
Got it.
And the drum part in that Big Star song might be happening on the guitar, and whatever combination of synthesizer warbles.
Yeah, because it's too literal to think that like our drums are like Big Stars when in fact it could be what is happening here with the drums will find its entrance into our song by wearing a completely different sort of body, a completely different shape, you know?
Yeah.
There was that so for people who don't know, there's this guy, Mark Robinson, who started a label called Teen Beat. He had a band called Unrest, which people do remember. He has another band called Flin Flon, which people are not that familiar with. But did he do something with a Flin Flon record where he had all the tracks laid out and he just swapped them out in different songs on the CD and the vinyl? Did you hear about that?
I don't know.
But it was all the same tracks, and so when you got the vinyl, it was completely different than the CD.
Sequence was different? Or you're saying the tracks, like the drums from this song?
Yes.
Yeah. That's amazing, because for years, and this is not like a diss on Mark Robinson at all, like I saw Unrest a few times, it was amazing, and like it's still like a thing we talk about as a band a lot. And like there's a couple Air Miami songs that are like greatest hits in our van.
They're good.
But there is a thing called the Flin Flon effect that these old friends of mine have, which is the power of weed, of like when you listen to a record high versus not high. Like old friends of mine, this is whenever that Flin Flon record came out, 2000.
Yeah.
Like it's still stuck. It's just like, oh yeah, I had the Flin Flon effect on me.
Meaning that you were...
like you hear it stoned and you're like, this is fucking amazing. And then you're like, listen to it, you're not stoned. You're like, it's pretty good.
That's so funny. I feel like I must be stoned all the time then, because I don't ever get stoned. But that's like my favorite. That first one I think is my favorite record by him.
Oh yeah, I gotta check it out again.
Yeah. No, it's really good. And I saw him play, and he also did this thing at the Flywheel in East Hampton. He also did this thing where he was like, it was just him solo, and he said, tell me something to write a song about. And people would throw things out, and he would just like write a song on the spot. And in the middle of a bunch of those songs, he was like, that's terrible. That was horrible. And he would like laugh at himself. But I love that. And there is that also thing with you guys when you play of making it up while you go, but not as a jam band. It seems something more creative than that.
No, it's not. It's all very intentional.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely like we are aware of like there's a certain level of precision, like right, like when we think about like the margin of error, like all this is definitely related to recording technology too. Like when you used to have to like be like, okay, we can afford 3 days at the studio. Here's all our ideas. Can we stay awake and focused for 18 hours a day, 3 days in a row? We would sort of be like, well, I hope we get a B+ in executing what we thought it would be. And now, like, when one of us makes a mistake, it's such a smaller mistake than the mistakes we used to live with and not even notice. Does that make sense?
But is more noticeable to you now, too?
Maybe, because we're so locked in. Yeah. But, like, the complexity of, like, our structures a lot of the time is really about building a constricting force to push against. Does that make sense? Like...
building a constricting force to push against. Yeah, creating it's like an Oulipo limitation. Sure. Like this is the thing that we can't do in this song.
Which is so different than a jam band. It's not like
which is a wandering.
Feelings never enter it. Which is like a funny thing.
You're not grooving. You're not grooving. Maybe you are grooving.
No way, yeah.
So there's also an aspect of your music when we talk about pushing against something or a resistance where two elements will come together, or more than two elements, but I can break it down into two, where the electronic elements will come with the instrumentation, and sometimes they'll find peace with one another. Like, especially the first 3 Joan of Arc albums, with some exceptions on those, they find like a harmony, and the technical or the technological parts become softer or more organic. But then a lot of times there's a clashing, but I do find that it's two different forms of instrumentation happening a lot. And this is something I just notice, I think, with you and the work you do in general, is there's this weird ecotone or something. I notice it maybe because I'm projecting, because I feel like I live there. There's this ecotone of this mediation, and it is almost like shamanistic, like between two worlds. Like, I'm going to stand on this line and I'm going to see what happens if I can hold both worlds in my hand, or I can stand with one foot in this world and one foot in that world, and I'm the line in between them. Now what happens when those live through me? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I have this... I'm not a guy who talks about his tattoos a lot, but I have... This is a funny tattoo to me. I'll show you. It's a monkey astronaut, and it's trying to eat the banana, but it can't eat the banana because its face helmet is on. And it's a funny thing. Like, I was hanging out with my brother one day, and he was like going to get a tattoo. I was like, yeah, I'll get a tattoo. And then I like knew the guy a little bit, the artist, and he's like, what do you want? And I was just like... It wasn't like I ever had an idea for a monkey astronaut. It was just sort of like, all right, how do I feel in the world? I'm kind of half monkey and half astronaut. That's what, and then, it just like came to me. And then, added layer of tension after, because it was really like the guy was like, what do you want? And I was like, home. And then I was like, monkey astronaut. And then he started cracking up, and then we together were like, it should be trying to eat a banana, but it can't get to it because it's helmet. You know, it takes the helmet off, it dies. But like,
well, that's a psychoanalytic part for sure. If you eat the banana, you die.
Right. Well, you can't take the. Right.
Yeah.
You suffocate. So it's like, I don't know, man. That's just like how it is. Like, I feel as much. I mean, I hate being in the country. Like,
you do.
It's like beautiful to me for like a moment. I get some like primitive response of like, oh, look at how far I can see. I can't hear any cars. But like, then I just am immediately like, I'm going to die out here. No one will hear me scream. This is terrifying. You know, so it's not like I feel pulled to the country or something. But that's just being a human in the 21st century, I think, is equal parts caveman and astronaut. So like, of course, there's primitive sounds that are just acoustic in the air, and then there's like mechanical glitching.
Yeah, no, I love that. Right, like, so if you are in the forest, no matter what, like, still a fucking plane flies overhead, and you're like, well, there goes that. You know, like, there's no way out. And also, you live in Chicago, which is like, I mean, it's leaning toward the right side of the country a little bit, or whatever you would call the right side of the country. But
right, it's the middle. Yeah,
but it's the city in the middle, which is really also there's just such an, I don't know, there's just such an in-betweenness about you in a way, and I feel that. I think, I mean, yeah, maybe I'm just projecting, but I feel that in fucking everything I do, that I was born on the line between two different worlds.
Well, it's, we've done a few collaborations now with this performance art group here. It's a couple, they're older than me by 15 years or so, 20 years. And, you know, I didn't really have any experience or knowledge of, like, performance art world. But when they approached me about collaborating, like, I just knew that I liked the people a lot and trusted them. And they're, like, very, you know, like, when you're a kid, I didn't even know I didn't have positive role models or something, you know what I mean? But then, like, somewhere around, like, 33, I, like, met these people. I was like, oh, these are positive role models for, like, how I can be in the future. And they're like, we should make something together. And I was like, what would it be? They're like, falling between two chairs. Like, that's how they started the whole thing. And I was like, well, what does it mean? They're like, well, everything you do, you can, like, comfortably be this thing, or you can comfortably be this thing, but you always choose to fail at both. So let's use that as the starting point. So that's the first time I was ever made aware of that. And I should make clear, too, like, everything we're talking about in terms of, like, how I personally am creative and how we're creative as a band, none of that's very conscious when we're doing it. You know, it's all like, a lot of the time it seems like we don't think or talk about anything else, but that's only so that we're prepared to do it when we don't need to think about it. Does that make sense?
Yep. But you must have a feeling, like, on your own. I mean, you got the monkey and astronaut tattoo, right? So, like, and again, I say this from my perspective, but I walk around with a feeling of, and I don't know if it's like a psychoanalytic thing where you can't ever have what you want, because then if you have it, you can't want it anymore. Where I'm always in a state of, it's like this weird perpetual longing that never fulfills itself. But I'm happiest when I guess, am falling between the two chairs, or maybe standing between them and trying to pick them both up, or whatever. Maybe it's not as painful as I'm saying anymore as I get older, at least. But yeah, I feel that that's part of that uneasiness too. Maybe with what you're doing is like, okay, if I can be someone that, you know, if you go and see the person that lives on the outskirts of town, the person that is the witch, or the you know, colloquial at least, witch doctor, you know, they're the fucking weirdo that helps you. you know? And I feel like when you say I want to fuck with people's heads or whatever, it's but in some way, I'm putting this in your mouth, but in some way it seems to me that there's a desire to help. Or
Oh, yeah.
like that.
It's not like there's no like wanting to fuck with people out of antagonism by any means. Like, you know, it's there's I can't think who said it, but there's like the famous quote about like only a scoundrel wishes well for everyone. You know, I can't remember.
Sounds like Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, right.
Right.
It is something like that. Kurt Vonnegut or something, but I do, like, you know, I truly, ultimately, like, it's mind-boggling to me that our audience, small and as ever evolving as it may be, is actually made up of individuals. You know, and so I can't think of like thinking of the audience is like,
right.
You know, what is that? A mob? I have no idea. Like, what is a crowd? But if I think of like individuals, I only want, like, I truly deeply believe in like the inherent dignity of all people. You know, like I want everyone to flourish. That's why, like, I you know, like. I don't even want to go down this tangent, but like I watched like the new Frontline episode about Charlottesville the other day, and watching that Charlottesville footage, I mean, this is a low bar because it like hurts everyone to watch, but like watching the footage from that, I was just like crying again, and I was like, I've seen this 50 times in the last year, and I'm still weepy, like like actual tears. Anyways, that's a tangent. All I'm saying is like, that's what's so distressing to me about like the systems of organization that are like fundamentally unjust is that I really do just want everyone to have the opportunity to flourish.
And those systems of organization that are unjust, I mean, to me, I would call them mythic in the sense that they're patterns that we see again and again and again, and they're totally recognizable. Yeah. So the idea of disruption, for me, it's not like the way that people talk about disruption so often is like, well, let's just take this other like mythic pattern and like put it here. But really, if you know, for me, if I watch the new Twin Peaks or something like that, that actually feels occult and not mythic to me. That feels like there's a branch of something new that is. When something is born, you know, really born and not just sort of switched out, then a possibility is made. And I think that's, you know, it's a utopian vibe in some way. It's like, if I can imagine something beyond this, then I've made space for it. And so it seems like, okay, well, so with all your projects, really, it's like, okay, but if I can actually do something here that brings together disparate parts, different worlds, and overlaps them, maybe there'll be a burst that something's born out of.
Yeah, that's if there was one word I would say that like motivates us, it would be utopian. And I would say that's not a word that like comes up a lot between us, but it's like how we, I don't think we need to know how we're getting somewhere before we need to know that we all want to be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish that
people waste so much time being like, well, how are you going to do this? And it's like, well, wait, let's agree on like what we're trying to do before we even know how we're going to do it. Yeah,
that's something that comes up on this show a lot, is casting out as far as you can, and then also pushing on that. But if you're doing sort of direct political work, I always say, like, imagine what you actually want and don't have it based on what you don't want. So in some way there's this new age thinking kind of thing. But imagine what you want and then roll backwards. So like, how would each step take you there? How would we get there? But you can't, obviously the on the ground direct action work is really important. But so you can't give that up, but you do have to like have this bigger vision. Otherwise, you just get caught in like mechanical, materialistic movement.
Yeah, and I know that like that like it drives me nuts that I'm not like, I mean, it doesn't drive me nuts, but I feel like I'm letting myself down, that I'm not a person who's just like on the street doing direct political action more often or at all, and just like that's not my focus. But then when I think about it, I'm like, well, I'm me, and I do have like a unique thing I can do. And so all I need to know is that it's motivated by that, and that I'm doing I'm offering what I can uniquely offer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think people find that direct action piece in what you do. So there's that noisy documentary about you and your music. And everybody keeps saying in that, which is, it's absolutely a true comment, and I love it. But it's just, oh, he's so fearless. He's so like, he doesn't give a fuck. He just does what he wants. Now, whether or not that's true for you and your interior,
sure doesn't seem like
from the outside, that's actually what it looks like from the outside, right? So again, there's like that weird so people are finding the activist function, the on the ground activist function, and what you do, just by you saying, I'm going to try to stay in my integrity as much as possible here. And when you do that, it actually does have this sort of activist effect that other people identify, even if you're not doing it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I understand, like, some people might say that that's sort of like, we let ourselves off the hook by being like, if I could just make great art, then I feel like, you know, but that, you can clearly see when it's actually happening versus when someone's just making a whimsical statement.
Yeah, it's pretty, like, it's pretty weird, like, so many of the cliches about, like, being creative when you're young, and even the cliches of punk rock, like, I feel like they cycle back. I can't remember if we were talking about this before we started, but it's more like these things cycle back, and it's like all the lessons that you learn when you're, like, first getting into punk rock, and it's so powerful, just to be given these sorts of permissions, like someone like Kathleen Hanna or Martine from Los Crudos or something, like permissions, or the way Thurston Moore stuck a screwdriver in a guitar at a certain point, but it also wasn't like a meditative, you know, it was still propulsive. The importance of those permissions when you're young, like, to stick with it and circle back to them, they just get deeper and deeper. You know what I mean? Like, it's way more interesting. There's such a funny inverse ratio between, like, the number of people that, like, paid attention to what we do and the quality of what we do. You know? And, like, it's so You know what's so funny? But it makes perfect sense, because it's like, you go to the record store and you got so much money to spend. Even if you, let's say you have 6 Joan of Arc records, you don't have a third of them even. And, you know, I'm going to be like, oh, am I going to get a 7th record by this one thing? Or am I going to
especially when I didn't like 2 as much as I liked the other 4.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because, so you and I met a long time ago, which I remember really well because you were playing the show that I went to, and you came to my house. But you said to me then, I don't know if you remember saying this or if you would still say this, but you said, you know, it's really funny, like, the times when I am most sincere are the times when people think I'm being the most pretentious, right? Oh. So there's an inverse there too of, like, you know, also when I try, and, you know, when I try to, like, put out there what's actually going on in me, there's a deep resistance to it. Yeah. And part of that resistance, I think, is being in that, you know, that, like, the familiar patterns, the mythic patterns or whatever, that people are stuck in this cycle. So you say something and it's like, ugh, like, what is he saying about flowers or what, or, like, you know, monogamy or, like, whatever the fuck you're saying. And somehow that rings pretentious, but really you're just like, no, this is possible. It makes
perfect sense though, because it's like, there's a social function and we don't fulfill in a lot of ways, as much as I'm like, we tick off all the boxes for, like, okay, we're doing all these things a rock band is supposed to do. But ultimately, we do not perform the sort of, like, social function of entertaining you with, like, the payoffs, whatever catharsism or transference of energy happens not when people expect them. You know, we don't have soaring choruses that everyone's gonna like sing along to.
Yeah. It's there was I did an episode of the show with Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall, and he was talking about how he had this weird idea of magic when he was a kid, that if he was walking one way, if he was like sort of walking to the left and then suddenly just moved right, that somehow a portal would open, you know? And I mean, that is sort of how it works, and that's also kind of what you're talking about. It's like you're not... and that is pushing someone. Like if they're coming with you in the song and everything is like, or the book for that matter, and everything's just kind of predictable and everything's just sort of like, it's feeling a groove and you just fucking push, you know?
Yeah, but that said, like, I don't feel like we're like, maybe I'm too close to it to see, maybe it's arrogance, but I feel like there is a mistake, like a sort of like amateur mistake that a lot of like math rock bands make, where they're like, here's a surprising change, and, you know, and that's just like a structural flaw.
I don't feel like that. Yeah.
We don't do that.
No. So I want to tell you a weird thing that happened once when I was talking about The Gap, which I love. It's so weird. I just read it. So The Gap, for people who don't know Tim's music as thoroughly as I do, there's a Joan of Arc album called The Gap, which was an immensely tracked album, and it's excellent. But at the time, people were a little, I guess, pissed off about it, right?
Yeah.
I love it. At the end of one of the songs, it's as black pants make cat hairs appear. There's a long ending where the lyrics say, "These uneven and quiet or even unsaid connections must be something. These uneven and quiet or even unsaid connections must be something." And when that album came out, I met a friend at a coffee shop. It was a loud coffee shop in Amherst, very busy. And I started talking to him about synchronicities and magic. And I said, you know, there's this weird song that I love. And at the end of the song, the singer says, "These uneven and quiet or even unsaid connections must be something." And as soon as I finished, the entire cafe quiet for about a minute. And I didn't say anything. And Augustine, the guy I was talking to, just raised his finger and he was like, you know, like really, like it was intense, you know. And then one person spoke and then everybody started speaking again. But there was this tension. And I do think, you know, when you talk about music as a utopic thing, or when utopian thing or whatever, there's some way of it winding in, not just to the people that are listening, but somehow it winds into what's going on in the world. And I don't know what that is, but maybe you have a better idea as a musician than I do.
I don't know. I mean, like I was saying about the cliches just becoming more and more real, it's like, so all of our first records, the label that put those out went out of business and was recently absorbed by Epitaph. And then they reissued all the records of ours they put out except The Gap. And they...
What?
Not only did they not reissue it, they just never brought it up. It was just sort of like the 3 before it and the 1 after it. It was like, okay, so we're putting
So the one after it too, but not the...
It wasn't like they drew the
That's really weird. Yeah.
It was just sort of like an unspoken thing. Like, well, this one doesn't get the reissue. But it was sort of like those first... It's really ironic for... And, you know, I don't know if... Yeah, ironic in a more formal sense than people usually use it. Like, it's also very sort of like... Feels like a long view poetic justice of some kind, in that, like, Epitaph, when I was a kid, represented the exact same people that were so freaked out and offended by us. Like, they were exactly... We were like a intensely bullied band when we began, you know, because people were just like, you aren't doing these things, you know, and that was a lot of the attention paid to us, was like, stop doing it wrong, you know. Excuse me.
Yeah, I can't imagine some of those, especially with Joan of Arc, some of the opening, like when you're an opening act for some of the bands that you must have played with.
Oh yeah. It's pretty weird. But it goes both ways too. Like, we just had a band that was opened a few shows for us that we were just like, it really does go both ways. Like, it really sets the wrong sort of, like, what are we even doing out here with this thing. But
so you're talking about epitaph and the gap.
Yeah. Well, and about how music weaves its way into things. Like, so now our record label now is putting out like a box set. This is kind of a circuitous route to this point, but our record label now is putting out this box set of all these first records. And so they're putting the Gap back out, and included in the box set, they're like, we're going to make a companion book. And, you know, this was before computers, so all the books were like, I mean, all the records were like written out by hand in notebooks, you know, like. So I found these boxes that had just been moving around of just like piles of notebooks of like the first 5 records just being like sort of like written out, structured, mapped, really embarrassing manifestos for each record. And I hadn't opened these boxes in 20 years, 15 years, I guess the last one. And I just handed them all over. Like I found the boxes, and I thought there'd be a bunch of stuff I'd be embarrassed about like whatever stuff. You know, who wants their journals from when they're 20? Just like, okay, have at it, make a book. But they're doing it now. And
didn't you do that with your tour diary?
I did. There's some editing in that.
Okay.
Yeah. But this is just handing it over to someone else straight off the journals and scanned in.
I'm just teasing you.
But it is like, this is just to say that like all the lessons that I was like fighting so hard to know at that time are just sort of more absorbed now. Like I have a friend who's a really amazing painter in LA, and we were talking, even this was 10 years ago now, and he was like, it's weird that I used to paint 60 hours a week, and now I paint 9 hours a week, but I'm more productive than I ever was. And I was like, yeah, I feel sort of the same about music. But then we were like, oh, but because in that time, you're like learning all the mistakes you need to make. So it's just natural that like you get better at expressing yourself with whatever your tool set is. So all this is just to say that like in those things was like there was one Captain Jazz interview that ever happened when we were an actual band in existence, and I like found this, and I hadn't seen it like since it came out. And I think even when it was like in a free weekly paper here in Chicago, and I think even at the time we were so like in our own heads, we didn't even really realize like, oh, some newspapers, okay, they're writing about us, okay. We didn't realize like, oh, that's like a thing a band should be excited about. And all I said was like, the whole interview was just about like, we aren't trying to write music, we're just trying to let music out. And I like read myself as a 19-year-old saying this, you know, as a 43-year-old, and I was like, whoa, that's so crazy. It is just like these lessons are relearned and relearned and relearned, and it's mostly just like inputting. I mean, you could see the number of books and records. It's like input what you can, and just like keep the lens clean to let everything out and stay out of the way, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's like there's a few things that I'm thinking of when you say that. So one is, sure, like if I read a journal, like this is it sounds like I'm bragging, but it's just a fact. I keep like little notebooks. Every time I read a book, I take notes in these little notebooks or whatever. I put my thoughts down in them. And once a friend of mine came over, and to tease me, she like grabbed one that was 5 years old, and she started reading out of it, and she's like, wait a sec, this is pretty good, you know? And I didn't remember writing any of the stuff that was in it at all. So like that comment, that's one of those bizarre things where you think, wow, like my younger self was so much smarter than I am now, and it also got me here, you know? So like sometimes I want to take the credit, sometimes I want to think I sent signals backwards through time to make my younger self say that, you know, like, or whatever, or maybe like I'm stupider now, but I'll think I'm smart, you know? Maybe it's a process of just becoming stupider as we get older, you know? And maybe that process of getting stupider is the process of getting out of the way. Like I'm sort of reducing part of myself because I know which pathways work, what actually cleans the lens, whatever. but I also think like it's kind of okay. We're gonna get like sort of into occulty stuff. So I'm just I'm gonna go off the deep end right now with it. Right. So like, you know, I talk about our thoughts. You know, where our mind is sort of a meeting house for spirits, and their conversations are our thoughts. And we get, as our actual consciousness, to over time begin to pick which ones we want talking, and which ones get invited to the church or whatever you want to you want to say. And so I think maybe it's that process too. Like these spirits are not allowed anymore, or if they are allowed, it's because I've made a decision to allow you to show up. So something like that as well.
Well, yeah. So there's two things. Like, one is like I really like this idea of like the definition of modernism being like a curatorial, a creative curatorial act on history, right? So it's like, yes, there's all this tradition I've inherited, and modernism is the gesture in the present of choosing what's meaningful from this and what's meaningful from this. And, you know, like, Bob Dylan sounds like shit to me, mostly. But, like, there's some Bob Dylan lessons, you know?
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah.
And who the fuck would I be to say there isn't? Like, obviously there is. So that's, like, the ghosts fighting, just in, like, a more academic than occult way of putting it. But it does.
That sounds really occulty to me, too. But, yeah.
Well, I mean, and it is, like...
Yeah.
It's... I don't know how conscious of a process it is when you're actually creating, but then the other thing is
it shouldn't be conscious.
It shouldn't be,
yeah,
right.
or it should be conscious in a different way than everyday consciousness of selection.
I think the consciousness now has to just be keeping the lens clean,
right?
Like, and it's and it really makes sense that like there should be less struggle as you become better at what you do, because hopefully, if there wasn't less struggle, that would mean those past struggles had no meaning. Like, you didn't overcome them if you're still struggling with them. So that's why it's like the lessons I'm surprised to read that I knew as a 19-year-old, and then like the bad reviews and aggression towards the Gap when I was a 25-year-old. It's like, I don't need to have those fights anymore because I've like struggled to have the permission, to win the permission to be able to just like be myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny on this trip. So I'm driving around the country right now, and a lot of what I've been thinking about are the people. This is how I frame it first. The people who have gotten in the way of me being myself, right? Now, obviously it's me. Right. But I've been actually on a process of sort of like reviewing my entire life and thinking, oh, that was a moment when someone got in the way. That was a moment when someone held me back. That was a moment when someone held me back. I've been thinking about it so much because, I'm turning 41 this year, and there's just this idea of it's time. It's time to like say it's over. Like those moments are over, and now who do I become? Rudolf Steiner has this whole thing about when you're 40, when you turn 40, around the time you turn 40, you can start to see yourself the way that other people see you. So around this time in your life, you begin to see your own face, which is something you can't do at any other... I mean, obviously you still can't see your own face, which is such a mind fuck. But you can begin to sense the motion of the gaze of the world on you. And when you do that, like, you become more of the world. Like, you become able to see through the eyes of the world. So you become other people more, and so you can forgive and let go of them more easily, I think. And so, I mean, it sounds like if you were doing that when you were 25, well, fuck, man. Like, you got there early.
I don't know if I was doing it at 25.
Okay.
I don't know. I think I was a monster for a couple years.
What do you mean a monster?
I mean, it was just like I was, I was like a bullied kid who, like, my mom would, like, give me permission to scream sometimes. Like, I would, like, just need to be like, Mom, I need to go do it. Like, and she'd be like, okay, well, she'd let me go in the bathroom, and I'd just sort of scream until I fell down. And it was just like some sort of unarticulated, quite literally, need to scream, right? And then like punk rock enters my universe, or I enter its universe, and suddenly like I start making like creatively screaming, and it's not just like, it's encouraged and applauded.
And so it's redeemed in a way, you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I suddenly get to start traveling, and, I'd never been anywhere. I've never seen anything. But I start to get to go places. And then I get to go places, and people are waiting for me, and people are happy to see me, and they, like, give me stuff. It's so nice to see you. Here's whatever you want. And so, I don't know. So I think I thought I was, like, I became a sort of monster of, like... hopefully it was a brief period, maybe 24 to 27 or something. It was probably more like 11 to 42.
But we'll wait till the end of the interview, and then I'll tell you.
Who knows? But yeah, I mean, it's just like, it takes a long time to know.
You mean you were not very nice to people?
I mean, I got in a fight with this guy the other day. It was insane. It had me like so freaked out for days. Even while the guy's wife circled back and was telling me, I'm sorry, I've been with him 11 years and I don't know why he's like this. Like, he does this. You
got in you were insulting each other, you mean?
Yeah, not like, I seriously stood there looking at his face thinking, I'm about to punch this guy in the face, and that is the path of least resistance right now, which is like insane to me.
Yeah.
There is a thing where, like, at the end of one of our shows, there's so much, like, adrenaline that goes into it, because it's just sort of, like, we're groggy all day from, like, however many nights in a row, and then, like, a long drive, and then set up and sound check, and we're groggy, and then we have to, like, summon this energy through cold medicine and whatever we can. And then at the end of it, to just have some guy, like, come up, and he asked me to sign his book. And I said, what's your name? And he said, Andy. And I said...
One of your books?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Andy. And he's like, don't write my name. But it was like sort of the end of the tour, a few shows left, and there was the last copy of the book that was there. He's like, well, give me a new one. I didn't want you to write my name in it. And we didn't have any. And I was like, I'm sorry, this is the last copy of the book. And he freaked out. I told you I didn't want you to write my name in it. And I was like, I'm sorry, this is the book we have. He's like, well, give my fucking money back, and like throws it on the ground. And he had already come up and introduced himself to me, and whatever, this is a long story.
Okay.
He had set the groundwork enough that before we went on,
Got it.
I warned my bandmates, don't let this guy near me after the show.
Got it.
Because it's going to be...
But he slipped through.
Yeah, because I mean, our layers of security aren't exactly... but it was...
If you're listening, Joan of Arc desperately needs a secret service.
Yeah. But it was... He was projecting enough, I am going to start trouble with you.
Yeah.
That I told my bandmates before the show even started, make sure this guy...
It was unpredictable, it sounded like, too. Like, what do I do in a situation where someone's throwing a book and shouting? Yeah. So you got to the point where...
I just said, asshole, please fuck off now.
Oh.
And then I kept trying to de-escalate from there, but he was just, like, raging.
But that's not you being... There's
a long line of people behind him trying to buy stuff.
And there's just nothing to be done at that point. I always feel so badly when someone likes what I'm doing, and then they act like a dick, or they just act weird or creepy in some way, and I have to be like, it's done.
Yeah, it's horrible
we
feeling.
Can't... It is the worst fucking feeling. Because I also know, I mean, there were times in my life when I went up to people that I admired, and I said, like, I was, like, nervous and said the weird thing, or, like, whatever. But I can't do anything about that when someone comes up and I don't, I think the shitty feeling is a feeling of needing to resist another person when really what I just want to do is love them.
And I was wide open. Like, this was after an hour of like, here I am, world, I'm open. And then he came up, and it's like the practicality of like these people that he's holding up in line while he yells at me are the difference of like paying for a hotel room tonight.
Right.
So like, just get out of the way and let us do the transaction.
And so the feeling is like, so I used to be a total fucking monster, just an asshole. You know, also was a bullied kid and had abuse in my childhood and all that kind of stuff. And so having the feeling of, oh, I'm touching on the feelings that I used to have back then when I was a dick. So it's completely evocative of the effects of the abuse and the bullying. So it all like, not to make, I mean, I'm still responsible for my actions, and I shouldn't have been a dick back then.
Not wear these prayer beads. I'm a grown man in prayer beads to just remind me, like, stay cool.
Right. So so the evocation of that time of my life is so painful, and I like you, I would think about it for like 3 fucking days, man. Like it's a terrible feeling, and especially when, if you talk about resistance in music or screaming and redeeming screaming, you've found these ways to like redeem and make productive and virtue out of these aspects of your life, and to have it sink back in, you're like, whoa, is this more delicate balance than perhaps I thought it was? And it means a lot to us that like we sell our own t-shirts. Like it's not just like when it's like we do everything, like we bring a sound person, but other than that, every element of the show we are doing, and that means a lot to us. Okay, so you do have prayer beads, and you have, I think I read somewhere you said, oh, I have this like life full of like rituals and things that I do. And so I want to talk about what those are, if you're open, and also connect it to, you know, you said that you've been having like weird experiences in your life that like maybe people wouldn't believe in or hear. And I understand that sometimes these things are extremely...
Are you talking about like in the Noisy documentary? I say
you
like,
said that, but I feel like you've talked about it elsewhere too. And I think, you know, sometimes these experiences are really intimate. So I understand if you don't want to go there, but if you do, I'll go there with you.
I mean, if I can speak vaguely about certain things, it's like, well, the same way that I said, like, if you're still having the struggles at 43 that you were having at 19 creatively, it means the struggles were meaningless. I would say, personally, that's true too. And, you know, I used to I had every edition of the anxiety and phobia workbook. Now I just have to like go through it once every 18 months and always surprise myself like, oh, I'm back here again. Like, wait, I already did this. But there's just like... So I think in the same way that I used to have to be more self-aware or intentional about struggling creatively, I was also doing so spiritually, esoterically. You know, like I did a lot of drugs, as a lot of people do. You know, always trying to expand and open my mind in whatever way possible, and
drugs for that reason.
I was always
like
a more than I was never a shut things down guy. Never interested me.
Yep.
But and you know, read all the holy books, and the things that aren't real fall away, and the things that are real get absorbed, and so I'm much less. I'm not casting spells as much as I used to have to. It's just built into my day-to-day now in a way where I've gone through a lot of very intentional reprogramming. Like, just a sort of like, I'm not letting fucking suburban Burger King Guitar Center America colonize my mind, you know?
Yeah, it's so as like a secular version of this, there's, you know, that philosopher Peter Sloterdijk, you know him? It's like DJK or whatever, like his name. But he's like sort of he's a philosopher of the day, right? And he writes about, he has this book called You Must Change Your Life, which is named after the line in the Rilke poem. And he says, you know, like, we're trying for revolution, but what we really need is life reform. And to me, this is an occult concept, ultimately, deeply, where it's the spell casting, the move to sort of radically like evoke the spirit and see. Eventually, that becomes a part of just actually the way you see the world. So you don't have to do it quite so much. So I find this sort of like, there's this. People ask me all the time, for instance, like, well, do you do sex magic? Do you know you're a sex worker? You're porn? Like, do you do sex magic? You're in the occult. And I'm like, no, sex is magic. Like, I don't need to, like, do sex magic. I just need to pay attention to what's happening during sex. And that is really the mind fuck, you know? Like, literally, I guess. But that's really, like, just a crazy, you know, space. And so as I walk through the day, it's like I've turned a certain phenomenological switch where the world is much, much, much different for me than it was before. And I don't know what other people are experiencing, but I don't think a lot of them are experiencing the thing that I'm experiencing and on a daily basis as a result of me having turned that dial or that switch, you know?
Yeah, and it's horrible to, like, assume anything about everyone. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, we can't say, like...
Which is why I felt stupid saying that,
But if I can speak more specifically, anyone who asks you, do you do sex magic, is too stupid to understand the answer. Like, because you just don't ask that question. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there gets to be a point where it's like... I mean, not to say, like, I eat my granola every morning with some deep intentionality of, like, really tasting it, but it's like there's no going back.
You can't.
You could, but you couldn't live with yourself.
The only way to do it, it's really interesting that you say that, because there's this guy I know who's this occultist in San Francisco. I've been practicing for years and years, and I at one point was having these experiences. I thought I was going fucking crazy. And he's like, well, maybe you are, but he's like, but I can tell you what these things that you're experiencing are. At least there's some point of reference in the history and the stuff that I understand. So here you go. And at a certain point, I was like, I just wish I could just live like a normal life. And he said, well, you can, but you're going to have to destroy everything you've ever known, which means you're going to have to be probably a drug addict, or you're going to have to, you know, drink yourself into oblivion every night. Which I've never had an addiction issue, and I've never really been drawn to that. And I was like, oh, I can't do anything about it now. Yeah. Like, it's too late. Which is, I think, a fair warning to people as well. There's always that warning there that's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Because you can't go back. And now I don't want to, but it's certainly caused a lot of pain and isolation and feelings of pain and isolation and alienation in my life.
And joy and connection. And
yes, of course. No, I mean it, of course. And that much more deeply. And the world is so, everything is so alive, you know? Yeah. But,
we had
yeah, go ahead.
We had like a week ago, maybe, what day is today? Monday? Sunday? Today's Monday? So a week ago, we were in Montreal. We had a day off, and we had sort of hit a low point in tour the day before of just exhaustion, and it was definitely like a sort of like every simple thing that could go wrong, things that you never imagine. Like, what if the stage smells so much like puke that you literally can't sound check without, like, all of us were sick? And then, like, what if at the same night, like, each one of us sits down in the toilet backstage and it collapses to the side? Like, these are, like, problems we never even foresaw, and they started happening at the same time of our exhaustion. We're like, they're screwing up what time's the load in, no, we're changing it, no, we're changing it back. So we had a day off the next day, and me and Jeremy went to a Korean barbecue on, like, our first night off in a week, and after weeks out. And we were, like, eating this beef and drinking this beer, and we were just like, this is so much like that moment in The Matrix when the guy is the traitor, and he's just, like, takes the bite of steak and the glass of wine, and he's like, just let me believe this is real. Remember that moment when he's like, when he's gonna sell out all of them?
Yeah.
And we were like, we're having that moment. Like, we just feel good right now, and we need, like, some beef and some beer. But there is no difference between, like, you don't need to sell all that out to enjoy the illusion of it.
Totally.
That was our whole conversation over our, like, reparative, psycho-emotional, spiritual reparative dinner. And I didn't think of it at the time. I mean, I haven't thought of the conversation since until now it comes up. But that is the whole difference is, I mean, you know, that's like the most basic ideology regarding chakras of just like, no, you're not supposed to exist on any one. The idea is to have all of them blowing out at the same time.
Yeah, I love what you say, because what it reminds me of is, especially in a moment where a lot of people are perceiving the world as extremely painful, right? And I try to talk to people and say, your inner self is never suffering. It's never suffering, actually. But, okay, so, like, this is, like, playing in this pain and this suffering of this narrative and this idea of how the world works. But actually, you get to a certain point, and the world of suffering actually becomes healing. Because you're engaged with things that are much more intense as you're sort of moving on. So you're like, I'll dip into, this is the wrong word for it, but I'll dip into the stupid world now. And that will actually heal me. I mean, it's what I do when I fucking watch Hell's Kitchen or whatever it is
right. We all
that
do
I'm
it every
doing.
day. Yeah.
Yes. So you do that on this sort of just regular level, but there are times when you enjoy the illusion. There's this version of what you said. There are these, like, I read them as a kid, these Piers Anthony books. They're called, like, The Incarnations of Immortality. It's like a fantasy series, and each one is like, one's about death and the guy who becomes death, one's about war, but the one in death, he goes to hell and he sees people eating garbage, and he's like, they're all eating garbage, and the devil says, oh, let me tell you what they think they're eating, and then he reveals, and they're all eating, like, they think they're eating, like, fine food and stuff, but they're eating garbage. So there's also this level which the unawareness of it is, even though we call that bliss is its own sort of like hell, you know?
Wait, explain that though. How is bliss? Because
the rest of your being and your knowingness is severed from you. So even though you're happy, it's the sort of reason why I'm suspicious of, like, what's it called? Advaita Vedanta Buddhism or whatever. That's like, it is as it is. Everything's perfect. Even though I just said your inner self is never suffering.
Sure.
But there's like, it's like, well, yes, but do you believe that because you believe that? Or have you amputated yourself? And they might just respond like, well, who cares? If you're happy, who gives a shit? To me, I want additional. I want to add capacity to that somehow, you know. I don't want to merely cut it off and eat the garbage and think that it's good, you know. But it's a trick.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so I struggle, but then the flip side of that is struggling. Like, my whole life, I've had all these, like, spiritual impulses and, like, wanting to have these effects and communicate with, like, spiritual beings and stuff. And then sometimes it would just happen and I wouldn't do anything, and it would just appear and I'd be like, what the fuck is going on? And other times I'd be trying so hard, I'd be like, come on, and nothing would happen. And that frustration of, like, not being able to will it into happening has plagued me for years, until actually pretty recently when someone explained it to me and they were like, here's what's happening and
what's
this
happening?
Is what you do.
I want to know.
Well, I'll tell you what he said to me without telling you what I said to him. Okay. He's a student of a esoteric, for lack of a better word, healer from Cyprus. And he said, when you have those feelings of wanting, instead of trying to push into the world, follow it backwards. Where is it coming from? And then as soon as I did that, it started changing things for me completely. Follow it backwards. And this has been my sort of message to the world consistently since then, is walk backwards. Do everything. Remember that Chris Leo's a good friend of mine. Remember this like lap song, "We Must Move Backwards to Progress"?
Oh,
This idea of keep.
I can hear the cadence of it.
Yeah, but the if you and I were to go outside and walk backwards on the sidewalk, we would encounter a different fucking world, you know? So this technique of, in every way, at the end of the night, I review my day backwards.
Mm-hmm.
I think about everything that happened backwards in this backwards review, and that gives me something. But also tracing, it's a time trick in some way. So that's what he said.
It's good.
Without me telling you what I said to him.
Yeah. No, it totally opens it up to me. It's funny, when I was a little kid, I hated going to school, right? Like kindergarten. And I had like a weird experience where like they were like whatever, they like, none of that matters. But the important thing is that I used to walk, my mom would drop me off, and then I would walk home from school backwards. I would immediately leave school and walk the distance home backwards. And then the neighbors started telling her, like, why do we keep seeing Timmy walking through the neighborhood backwards when he's supposed to be in school? And my mom was like, why are you always doing that? And I was like, because I think that if anyone like drives past and sees me, they'll think that I'm walking towards the school. Isn't that weird? Like,
no, that's
like another
that's so funny.
Really extreme example of a thing I knew as a 5-year-old.
I used to do it too. But what I would do, I was in high school, and I was just so I mean, I still am as a fucking 40-year-old, but I was so horny all the time that anything that I could do with my dick was just like, let's fucking do it. So what I would do is I would walk home from school, but I would walk backwards with my dick out so I could pee while I was walking. It had this like, but it's funny.
Leaving a trail behind you. Yeah.
Yes, but if you walk forwards while you're peeing, you get your piss all over yourself. So there's this like, I don't have to be immersed in the smoke that I just blew out of my mouth.
Right.
I get to actually see it as I pull away. So there's something in that technique about it, I think. Yeah. Maybe we should have done this whole episode backwards, you know, Twin Peaks style, and then I could have played it. What's that? Kinsella?
Olesnik.
Yeah. It's like there's that.
I thought of that yesterday.
You did?
It's funny. I guess that's how things work, but yeah.
Biba Renak. There's that DC Comics character, Zatanna, who she casts all her spells by saying the words backwards too. Anyway, that would be, I think, the message of the show. That's also it's all sort of coming around again in this pattern, but just the idea of I'm going to reassemble the parts, you know, here differently, and something new will appear. All right, man. Well,
wrapping it up.
Let's wrap it up.
And the reassembling of parts. Perfect.
Exactly. I had such a great time talking with you.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Everybody, thank you for watching and listening.
Thank you.